This is going to be a fun one. You may think this one's going to get a little sciencey, maybe, which is fine because we're going to tie this all back to human health and why this matters. So, why are we going down this bunny trail? Why are we talking about the sun so much? Why are we talking about hydrogen? Well, believe me, it all ties back to how you work and human health. So, none of this I would be talking about if it wasn't important and it didn't tie back directly to you and how energy transfers and how basically, you run your body. So, this is pretty cool stuff, but we've got to start somewhere. We've got to basically start, with a basis of information and an understanding of how you work. Because believe me, you are not taught proper about how you work. And not only that, it's amazing the amount of misinformation there is in science. So we'll talk about that as we sort of plow through this. And again, I think it'll be obvious to most people. I'll try to point it out if it needs to be pointed out where there's a lot of bullshit or chaos and confusion. First of all, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Neighborhood Nutrition. So, Neighborhood Nutrition Clinic will be opening November 1st ish in Ada, America. And we will be doing thermography, we'll be doing bioresonance, we'll be providing nutritious food and beverages, we'll have our line of supplements there, and we'll be doing our best to help people be their best themselves. So, what we've discovered is a way to basically nutrient and feed your body in an optimal method, let's say. So again, our body needs certain things, certain cofactors. If you look down sort of below that or deeper in the weeds, there's, influencers, let's say, that knobs and levers that can be used within the human body to do things. Today, we're going to talk about a huge one, which is hydrogen. Holy cow. Will this blow you guys away? So, we'll start. I'm going to go through a presentation again. So there's some pictures in this. If you're, listening on the road, or you're listening driving down the highway or whatever, I'll do my best to describe the pictures that I'm showing. And again, I talk a lot. I'm pretty descriptive in what I say, so it shouldn't be too hard to pick up what we're viewing on the screen. Although this would be better watched on video. I'll just say that right now, just because I'll just be showing you some things and it'd be better to get the graphic illustration. And you get to see me when I mess up and all my strange faces and all that kind of stuff that I make when I'm stuck or stuttering or things like that. So anyway, welcome to Chip Talks, and this one's cool. I'm not sure what we're going to do next week, but we will tie kind of this last series of stuff, thermography and hydrogen, and we've talked about the sun some. We'll probably have a philosophical Chip Talks where we talk a little bit about religion and how all of this ties to religion. So one of the cool things that I've discovered is that as you begin to find higher truths and build higher truths, science and religion and philosophy and logic and math, whoop, they all come together. And you know where they all come together? Right at that big shiny ball in the sky. Okay, so that's why we're talking about hydrogen. That's why we're talking about the sun. That's why we're talking about energy, because we have to start there, because all those things affect you. They're affecting you right now every time you take a breath. Every time the sunlight hits you, every time you're influenced by radiation of any kind, all these factors are influencing you. Do you think it matters? Yeah, it matters. Here's the thing, boys and girls. So let me tell you a little secret, a little truth that I'm finding. We're about as low functioning as we can be right now and still be alive. God didn't build you to be a beast of the earth. And that's kind of the way that we function right now. So we function as a mammal, and we operate similar to mammals, just like mammals operate similar to other subspecies. But you ain't no mammal, friends. God made you special, and God made you into something that can evolve when we understand enough about our nature. Okay? So right now we think we're like a bear or a dog. We have to eat things in order to generate energy to stay alive because we see other animals do that. Not the case with you. You are special. You are different. And this story, this mystery, let's say, that I'm kind of on and uncovering is the greatest story ever told. It's the coolest stuff that you've never been taught. And again, it does it stay within the bounds of physics and logic and math? Absolutely. Absolutely. So anyway, it's cool stuff. And the interesting thing to me is just how much we've been deceived. Either I'm the smartest guy in the world and I'm just figuring all this out, and I don't think so, because I'm, about where Einstein was, about where Tesla was, about where Hermes was. I'm sorry, I'm not that smart. I'm just uncovering a story. I'm looking at logic and I'm uncovering a story, which is really cool. And it's kind of unrolling. It's you guys we're a month or so behind where my head's at right now, but it is an unrolling story. And again, it supports everything that I've learned, over the years in my math research and logic research and scientific research and free energy research and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm a weird guy. So anyway, let's get into hydrogen, shall we? This will blow you away. So if you guys if you're a chemist, this will be really interesting for you. If you're a physicist, this will be really interesting for you. All that stuff that you learned in high school chemistry and all that, remember that stuff that we just had to memorize and you just hated doing it? Well, it turns out it's kind of important, but the way that we were taught it is just crap. So anyway, let's revisit all that and potentially teach it to you in a little different way. Okay. So I'm going to go to presentation mode here. So if you're listening at home or you don't have a way to get this on video, then I'll describe what I'm showing you. But what I'm showing right now is just, it's a graphic. It's a percentage of basically what's in our atmosphere, the main constituents of elements, let's say, on Earth. And they consist of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and then phosphorus and sulfur inside of us. But those four, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, are what make up, 90-something% of the air that we breathe. But, everything that you see, right? So most life on Earth. So what's a carbohydrate? Well, CHs, right? So carbon and hydrogen, water, H2O, right? So most of the stuff that you see on Earth is made from carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. Why? Well, they're stable, again, and that is probably the best answer of why we have things made of these elements. So why is this important? Why am I showing you this? Well, I want to show you that, again, carbon, what's it found in? Carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. That's pretty much what makes up you. Hydrogen, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, for those of you that don't know, is like DNA and RNA, okay? So hydrogen, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Nitrogen, nucleic acids, proteins, and some lipids. So what are we missing there? Carbohydrates. So again, sugars are not made of nitrogen, but nitrogen still makes up a lot of you, about 1%, or well, in mammals, sorry, 4%. And then in oxygen, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. So these guys make us up. Now, in animals, we also have phosphorus and sulfur. So we create phospholipids, and we use sulfur to do other things in our bodies. But they're less than 1% really of the mass, our mass. So they're small, but they're important. But anyway, 63% of our mass is oxygen, okay? 10% of our mass is hydrogen. So that's pretty cool. And I'm just pointing these out because all of these things are sort of builder molecules, let's say, builder elements, builder atoms. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about hydrogen in a second. Well, we just did a little bit. It's one of the major things that makes up our atmosphere, what we breathe, what precipitates down from us from the ionosphere, hydrogen, okay? So in the old model, if we look at this is what I was taught in high school, so I don't know if you young people are taught quantum mechanics yet. We're going to get into a little of quantum mechanics. It's not that bad. Don't let it freak you out. It's pretty easy to understand. I, learned it in not too long, so you guys will be pretty easy to teach it to you, okay? So, but we got to start with the old model. So the old model of what an atom looked like. So you guys will remember that we had protons and we had neutrons and then we had electrons, right? And we had like an atomic number, and that atomic number was usually associated with the protons and electrons. So how many protons or electrons did an atom have? And that would be indicative of its periodic table. So like, let's see, let me get an example here of the periodic table. I could have just had this up. So again, I don't know my periodic table that well. Oh, oxygen is 8. So again, 8, if you look at something like 8, so oxygen would have 8 protons, would have 8 electrons. And again, the electrons are arrayed in shells, so SPDF, I think if I recall, and electrons can be in shells. But anyway, this is kind of the old model. So you had protons, and they were kind of balanced. They were positive charges, and they were balanced with electrons, which were negative charges. And then you had neutrons that were in there, right? So there could be more neutrons than protons. And, it was always kind of confusing to me at how in the world all that worked. But I do recall that the protons matched the number on the periodic table, and the electrons were sort of, similar, right? Well, what is a proton? Now, this will freak you out, okay? If you think about, what is a single proton? Well, a single proton is hydrogen. So a proton just by itself with no electron or anything is called hydrogen. It's just hydrogen with an empty electron shell. So a proton is hydrogen. Hydrogen is a proton. Let that sink in a little bit, because what that's saying is that oxygen is just 8 hydrogens and 8 neutrons and 8 electrons. You getting me? Everything is hydrogen. Every freaking thing is hydrogen. A proton is hydrogen. Can a neutron become hydrogen? Or can a hydrogen become a neutron? We'll talk about that in just a second. But this is the one thing that I want you to realize. Here's a diagram of a proton. It also says H+, which is hydrogen needing an electron. H+. So every proton is just ionic hydrogen. Now, does hydrogen bond different than other atoms? Yes, it does, because it's special and unique. Okay? So, hopefully this is just blowing people with some chemistry background away. Maybe this is taught in chemistry. I don't know. It blew me away. It's like, what? A proton is just hydrogen? That means everything is hydrogen? Metal is hydrogen? Oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, or just hydrogen? Different configurations of hydrogen? Yeah, that's what that means. Okay, well, has anybody else ever, been here? It turns out one guy, a guy named Prout, and again, you could look him up, but he basically proved that everything is an expression. So if you look at the periodic table and you look at masses, again, all the masses of the periodic table are just integer multiples of hydrogen. And he proved that, okay? So again, he was in the Prout's hypothesis was an early 19th century attempt to explain the existence of various chemical elements through a hypothesis regarding the internal structure of the atom. In 1815 and 16, the English chemist William Prout published 2 papers in which he observed that the atomic weights that had been measured for the elements known at the time appeared to be whole multiples of the atomic weight of hydrogen. Everything is hydrogen. 8 of them is just 8 times the atomic weight of hydrogen. Oxygen's atomic weight is 8 times that of hydrogen. He then hypothesized that hydrogen atom was the only truly fundamental object, and that atoms of other elements were actually groupings of various members of hydrogen atoms. Attaboy! Prout was right. So, we've established that, or at least Prout and I have established that hydrogen is everything. Everything is hydrogen. And again, this can be proved, it can be validated, and Prout did a pretty good job of proving it. Now, you can go, well, some atomic numbers are not multiples of hydrogen. Correct. That's because isotopes exist. So, but if you look at the pure forms, there are going to be integer multiples, which is pretty cool. Okay? What's an isotope? It's just like an extra couple of neutrons thrown in there, 1 or 2 or whatever. And again, so you get heavier things and all that don't quite match those integer of hydrogen. If you guys are getting how big of a deal this is, it's just freaking huge. Now, here's the other cool thing is all these little guys can change states, okay? Because now we're going to get into quantum mechanics, and I'm going to teach you guys a little bit about quantum mechanics. Again, you don't have to learn much about quantum mechanics because you just have to understand what a proton is. Again, a hydrogen atom is. So a proton is just an H plus, right? So we're talking about hydrogen here. So what is hydrogen? It is 2 ups and 1 down quark. So we've all kind of heard of quarks. You know, people talk quantum mechanics, quarks and bosons and mesons and leptons and all that, right? That sounds scary and confusing and chaotic. It's really not so bad. So a proton is just 2 ups and 1 down, okay? So 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. There's a color representation here. So you have to have basically, and again, color doesn't equate to color. Color equates to charge. So this is why quantum computers will be cool, is because they can have so many different states, okay? So you have a charge and a spin associated with a quark, and this is where we get a little complicated, but we don't need to go there. Just know that a proton is 2 ups and 1 down quark, okay? So hydrogen is just 2 ups and 1 down quark. Yes! Yes! So theoretical quark fusion found to be more powerful than hydrogen fusion. It's kind of the same, really, except when you get more of these guys bound together, again, it's going to be more. If you're just quarking out of hydrogen, it's going to be the same, okay? But hydrogen is just 2 ups and 1 down, just like a proton is. Now, the other thing that Bohr said was in that atom was something called the neutron, right? So you had basically, you had protons, you had neutrons, and you had electrons. When we throw in the quantum stuff, it gets more. But what's a neutron? Well, a neutron is just 2 downs and 1 up. Quark. So proton, 2 ups, 1 down. Neutron, 2 downs, 1 up. Okay? Now they have a charge associated with them and all that, and that's how they stay together. But you kind of have hydrogen as a proton, and then kind of the flip of that is a neutron. So everything is just hydrogen and kind of anti-hydrogen? I don't know, but it looks like what we've been taught is just complete, confused crap. It's way easier. Guys, listen. God is a perfect engineer. God is a perfect logician. God is a perfect philosopher. God is God. God is everything. God is perfect. Would God make a system so complicated that you had to go through other men to understand? No, he would not. If we can't describe our physical universe in simplistic terms, then God's not a good engineer, and God's a perfect engineer. So all of this, regardless of how, and this is what I'm saying, is this story here is very logical. It's very simple. It's very easy to understand. We have to muddle through all the crap of research that's out there and translate that to stuff that's easy to understand, okay? So I'll tie all this in together to why all this matters here at the end, but let's just say hydrogen is everything. And again, hydrogen kind of has an anti-hydrogen that's called a neutron that's also associated with pretty much everything. Okay, well, can these guys change state? Yeah. So we've all heard of radioactive decay, right? So carbon-14 dating and things like that. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that carbon-14, so this is beta decay, is exactly what carbon-14 is. So, or beta, carbon-14 undergoes beta decay. But what happens is carbon-14 under beta decay becomes nitrogen-14 with the release of an antineutrino and an electron. Okay, so when carbon decays, it just shoots off an electron and becomes nitrogen-14. When carbon-10 decays, it becomes boron-10 and shoots off a positron instead of an electron. So turns out there's electrons, which are minus, and positrons, which are plus. Anyway, it gets a little complicated, but it's really not that bad. It's just a new model. There's another type of decay called alpha decay. And again, this is where just an unstable, basically nucleus, will change form and become something else. So, point of all this is to tell you that hydrogen is here. Hydrogen can become helium. Helium can become, so things build through the periodic table in complexity. But they can always move around and change states, okay? So as things become, you can think of it as this, things become charged, gases become charged in our ionosphere. And as those gases fall, as those gases become heavier and precipitate down, they form with other atoms to form different gases, and then as that precipitates down, they begin to form solids. So what's the first solid that's formed? It's water that precipitates to us from the sky, right? So anyway, but all these things sort of precipitate down in gaseous phases until they become solid as they get closer to Earth, and then they get more solid, the more kind of into the Earth, let's say, they fall, right? But this is through decay. And ultimately, things decay back to hydrogen, which precipitates hydrogen gas, which precipitates back up into the atmosphere. It's just all a big cycle, but it's pretty cool. So let's summarize here, and then we'll talk about a few other things. So really, all matter is composed of protons and neutrons. A proton is just simply a hydrogen atom without an electron. Not and electron. I misspelled something here. Protons and neutrons can change form and become each other. Everything is an expression of the hydrogen atom. Why is this important? Because now we can better understand how to influence the system. So now the system isn't chaotic and confusing. It's simple in the way that God engineered it. And it's simple and easy to understand in the way that God engineered it. Again, chaos and confusion are the tools of whom? Logic and order are the tools of whom? Okay? So we have to use our knives. So I have a knife of logic and order, my God knife, and I'm going to use it to cut through all this chaos and confusion of this crap that we've been institutionally taught on purpose, right? We're just taught all this crap, all this chaos and confusion. Electricity could be taught through the principles that I'm teaching you about how energy moves through hydrogen from the sun, down precipitates to the earth, and how we become energetic or ionized through that. You don't need electricity, and you frankly don't need a lot of physics. They're just chaos and confusion. They're structures that don't add to simplicity, they add to chaos and confusion. So this is kind of cool as a researcher. I know if you look at light and how light works and light from the sun and photons and how that works, there's so much chaos and confusion there, which just tells me that that is important, super important. Okay, so what else about hydrogen? Well, it turns out that hydrogen is a major component of all DNA. And again, the hydrogen bond is different, right? So it's an electrostatic bond. It's not a covalent bond. It's a different bond because everything is hydrogen. So it has to have its own special bonding. How do you bond hydrogen to hydrogen? Well, you have to have a special bonding, to be able to do that. You have to have a thing called a gluon to be able to glue those guys together. But hydrogen is a major component of DNA. And what I'm showing is just DNA molecules. So I'm showing a GC hydrogen bonding, so how guanine will bind to cytosine. And again, it's hydrogen bonds. How does adenine bond to thymine? Same way with hydrogen bonds. So literally the DNA helix is composed of hydrogen bonds. It's how it sticks together. Is this impacting anyone yet? Are you guys getting the importance of this? And are you getting how this all ties together and marries together nicely? Well, again, I talk a lot about the sun, and I spell SUNSON for a reason, because I want to draw your attention to the fact that that big shiny ball in the sky is not only an expression of energy, but is an expression of spirituality. And I think that part of what was lost in Jesus's teachings is he taught us a lot about the sun, about that we don't need intermediaries between us and the sun to be able to receive energy or knowledge or things that we get through this beautiful creation that God gave us, through Sophia, or however you want to look at it, but the sun. So again, how does this relate to hydrogen? Well, if I just shine UV light on water, I'm going to get hydrogen. Isn't that cool? Now I have to have it pressurized. Again, so my water has to be in a gaseous state. Does that happen here on Earth? Does water turn to a gaseous state and rise into the air? That is called condensation. What happens when the sun hits condensate? Do you get hydrogen formation? Yes, you do. All right, so what else about the sun? So again, hydrogen, what is the sun? Hydrogen and helium. Hydrogen being converted to helium. There's a few other elements in there, the most stable elements, but you have this giant hydrogen reaction pointing at us, blasting stuff at us every day. Photons and neutrons and protons and electrons, ions that ionize hydrogen here to create other elements. Yeah, that's it. It's that simple. So what I'm showing now is just some Gnosticism. Again, if you look at the word Sophia, so just wiki Sophia as it relates to Gnosticism, and I think that you'll kind of get an understanding of how this ties together. And again, the sun is where philosophy, logic, truth, math, physics, electricity, everything that we've been institutionally taught all ties together. Now, why wouldn't you just teach us about the sun? Well, the sun is an expression of God, and we don't live in a godly world, boys and girls. This is hidden from you. This is obscure. This is chaos and confusion. The truth here is hard to find, but it's there. And again, it's right there. Now, why does all this matter to you? Okay, why does sunlight matter to you? Why does energy exchange matter to you? Why does any of this matter? And how does this tie back to our health right now and what's going on with me right now? Well, again, as I've described, I think we're functioning at about the worst, or let's say least efficient way that we can function as humans. We're very much like beasts of the earth. We're designed to be this really cool, energy efficient machine, kind of like a plant and an animal both, right? So we have the ability to photosynthesize, we have the ability to run on light. You absolutely can be a light being. You're just not functioning as one right now. Now, is there other evidence of in our physicality the importance of the sun to our being? Yes, and it turns out that's vitamin D. And it turns out vitamin D is really what makes us different from mammals. Because a mammal can get vitamin D from the sun regardless of where it lives. You can't. If you live north of Oklahoma, you get very little vitamin D from the sun. Okay? Now, why does this matter? Vitamin D is associated with our ability to be antibacterial. And most of what's wrong with us right now is bacteria. We're like rotting, decaying corpses. Let me say that again. We are like rotting, decaying. Throw a little sugar in there and it goes a lot faster. So we're like rotting, decaying corpses. That's what most of us are like. We're kind of dying on the inside and rotting on the inside through the bacteria. And again, why? Because we cannot control our bacteria. Why? Behavior and diet. We don't get in the sun enough. We do not generate enough vitamin D. And we eat ourselves into an anabolic state constantly. Okay? So, two pieces of this equation, kind of how much and how often we eat, and it's mainly how often we eat, that causes us to basically not be able to process vitamin D. And then our inability to get in the sun and be able to understand the importance of vitamin D. So there's lots of studies out there. I mean, you guys can find study after study after study on vitamin D and everything. I'll tell you a really important study that I just read about vitamin D and autism. Again, to me, autism, everyone has a best, let's say, and we all have a best that we can be. None of us are at our best. We're way down here. How do we get there? Well, things happen and our immune system kind of gets dragged down and we find a new normal because we don't have the kind of resources or horsepower because of vitamin D and sunlight and diet to get back up to where we need to be, okay? So autism is a severe dragging down of that immune response. So they're way, way, way down here and they're stuck. So most people will respond if you stimulate your immune system in the right way, and you'll kind of pop back up a level and pop back up a level and pop back up a level and pop back up a level until you almost get to kind of your best, right? So a near perfect. But autism, they're stuck, okay? Well, why? It's a bacterial loop. And again, other thing, Epstein-Barr, if you've got Epstein-Barr, people like that. Again, there's other kind of bacterial loops where these bacteria don't die. They get in white blood cells or they get in nerves and they stay active and our body can't kill them. Why can't our body kill these bacteria? Because we don't have enough vitamin D. So if you begin to look at vitamin D status in any disease, you're going to say, do what I did. Go, wow, this has to be correlated, right? So bacteria, disease, vitamin D, they all go together. Which means that if we can improve your vitamin D status, you're going to be a lot healthier. If you have a severe disease like autism, again, 5,000 ICUs of vitamin D every day if you have autism, okay? 75%, according to the study that I read. I haven't seen this yet because I haven't started suggesting this yet, but I'm suggesting it now. But 75% of the kiddos in this study responded to vitamin D. Now, I will tell you with autism that I get response in pretty much every kid, so, 75% is great. How much did they respond? Well, again, 75% is a good number, so you're moving the needle. That just tells you that they absolutely need vitamin D, that's a high level thing that's missing. The other thing that the study found was that vitamin D status at 3 months of gestation in the babies was low. So, in the womb at 3 months, vitamin D status was low. Again, mother's vitamin D status was probably low. And these are kids that are born autistic. They were low right off when they were born, and then they were low at 3 years of age. So low vitamin D causes us to be just a bacterial petri dish, okay? And then again, if I eat a lot of sugar, if I throw a lot of agar in my petri dish, guess what? I'm going to grow a lot of bacteria, and that's not going to be so good for me. Okay, so hydrogen from the sun. Hydrogen is the mechanism. It's the transfer mechanism of how energy moves in electrons, but protons, but let's say this quantum soup, is the way that energy transfers to us from the sun. It organizes into atoms and molecules that, again, look to me just to be like one thing, just different forms and structures of hydrogen. So hydrogen forms in an 8-unit structure. That's called oxygen. So anyway, we'll get into this more. Hopefully we won't be so sciencey, but again, we will refer back to this one because I'm going to be talking about hydrogen bonds, how those are energetically used inside of you, how those relate to sugar, how those relate to carbon. So we're going to be talking a lot about hydrogen, but hydrogen bonding to carbon is just hydrogen bonding to itself. So it's really cool. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope that you found this interesting and informative. We will be back with another Chip Talks next week. Thank you guys very much. Again, if you're interested in helping with the show, we love sponsors, so we'd love to talk to you. And if you have show ideas, again, throw that in the Chip Talks group. Feel free to post in there or ask questions, do anything that you want. That's your group to communicate with me and my group to communicate with you. So let's use it that way. Anyway, see you guys.